Okay, today we are going to fully disassemble and reassemble the bolt on a Winchester 72A. Here's a couple of tools you'll need. First step is to clear the rifle and then remove the bolt. Go ahead and unlatch the bolt and pull it to the rear. When it stops, you'll have to depress the trigger a little bit and then it'll pull the rest of the way out. Next, you have to remove the retaining pin that holds the rear metal cap in place. Even though this rear cap has what looks like a flat tip screwdriver channel, this is definitely not a screw and you do not need to spin it out. You'll need a small punch and a hammer. It's a whole lot easier if you have a vise to keep it nice and steady. If you push the cap inwards a little bit towards the body of the bolt, it'll release some of the spring pressure on the cap and it'll allow you to push the pin out a bit easier. You still might have to get some pliers and rip that sucker out. This cap is under a lot of spring tension, so when you get that pin out, you're going to really want to control it and not let it shoot out, or else you're going to lose your cap and your spring and eyeball. And once you get that stuff out, just set it aside somewhere safe. Next, we have to get the rear metal sleeve off. This is just a pressure fit sleeve, so you're just going to need a hammer and a punch, and you just want to drive it backwards. Do this carefully. Make sure you don't mar any of the parts on the bolt, or else you might cause some functional issues. Next step is to remove the firing pin, retaining pin, a little bit farther up. Once you've got the retaining pin out, you should be able to work the firing pin out. You've sort of just got to wiggle everything around until you figure out how to get it to drop free. After the firing pin comes out, you will be able to remove the bolt handle. This bolt handle is a little bit wobbly and messed up. This is kind of a common issue on these. We are going to fix that, but that's a different video. Now it is time to remove the extractor and the little bolt guide on the other side. You'll need your little teeny punch and hammer. You don't need to use a little teeny hammer like this, but you know. A bench block is also very helpful. You're going to want to hammer the retaining pins out from the bottom and pull them up through the top. Before you take any of these out, make sure you keep track of which side is which. The extractor is slightly bigger than the bullet guide on the other side. Make sure not to lose your pins or the little springs in the channels. Okay, here are all of the parts. This thing hasn't been apart in ages, so we're going to go ahead and clean everything up with a little faurot steel wool. You just want to get rid of all the goo and stickies and powder residue. Okay, here are the extractor and the bolt guide side by side. You can see that the extractor has a meteor hook on it. It's a little bit wider. Again, just keep track of which one goes where. When you're reinstalling these, make sure you don't forget to put the springs back in their little holes before you put the retaining pins back in. Just push them down, pop these bad boys in, and then you've got to keep pressure on it so that everything lines up. you're having a hard time getting the retaining pins in, you can use your small punch or a slave pin to keep everything lined up as you drive the pins back in from the top. And after they're both installed, just give it a quick function check, make sure the springs are in place and working properly. Okay, now it's time to put the bolt handle and the firing pin back in. You want to put the bolt handle on first and make sure that goes on in the correct orientation. Here's the firing pin. The retaining pin goes through this oblong hole that you see here. So again, you're just going to have to wiggle everything around until you can figure out how to slip it back through. It's a little bit tricky. Now just get everything lined up and pop your retaining pin back in. And just try to hammer it home. You'll have to kind of move things around until everything gets lined up properly. Once this pin is installed, it's going to retain the firing pin, which in turn retains the bolt handle. Next step is to put the pressure fit sleeve back on. The sleeve has holes. Make sure you put the holes on the back end so it matches up with the holes in the bolt body. Those holes are what you're going to slip the spring retaining pin through. Just make sure everything's nice and lined up. And the little pin that looks like a little teeny barbell is what you're going to be sliding through there. Now this is one of the harder parts of the whole operation. You're going to want to put the bolt back in the vise if you've got one. The spring needs to go back in its home with the little metal cap on. This is the point in which the little slot tip screwdriver channel thingy on the rear metal cap comes into play. You've got to push really hard on the spring and cap to get it fully in. The little screwdriver slot allows you to use a screwdriver to sort of help compress it straight in without the screwdriver slipping around. Be very careful doing this. You've got to push really hard, and if you slip, it could mean stitches or a bashed knuckle. Eye protection is also a good idea, just in case the spring decides to launch. And that pin's going to be real tight. Don't be afraid to give it a little light hammer treatment. And voila, all done.